Hello everyone, I'm Michael and I'm going to be showing you how we have dinner. Today I'm going to make mashed potatoes, meatballs, and asparagus with bacon. What I usually do when I make my dinner is I'll start with whatever takes the longest amount of time, that being the mashed potatoes because they're going to have to boil. So I've already cut some potatoes, peeled them, and I have my water going so I can go ahead and be ahead of the game. So basically with us, I typically will get enough potatoes for what, 4 of us eating. I'll probably do about 6 potatoes. Depending on your family and how many you have, you can kind of guide and choose how many you want to use. When I do the water, I usually have probably about that much above where my potatoes usually sit. That way when it boils, it's not overflowing too high because you're going to have it on a high heat as it's boiling. With your potatoes, typically, I don't know about a timeline, I usually gauge it by sticking a knife in it, and if it comes out nice and smooth, I know that they're ready to go. So those are boiling, as I said. So what I'm going to start showing you to do right now is the Brussels sprouts. So with the Brussels sprouts, I just have a bag of Brussels sprouts you can get from your grocery store. I do cut my Brussels sprouts in half. So I'll get a few of these out here and I'll start cutting the Brussels sprouts. The reason why I started with that second is because that's the second longest amount of time that's going to take to cook. The meatballs will take less time, so like I said, potatoes I start first because they take the longest. As that's boiling, it gives me time to start the rest of the meal. So like I said, I'm going to cut these Brussels sprouts in half. They come whole. It's not that hard, just right down the middle in halves, and I'll show you how I arrange them on a baking sheet, which I like to use. My baking sheets, I do add parchment paper, and for parchment paper purposes, it just makes cleanup a lot easier, because a lot of times once you start adding whatever the liquids and juices start coming on there, they'll stick and make cleanup at the end a little bit more than you'd like. So for me, quick and easy cleanup is the best. And I'm just actually placing it around. I'm going to do enough to line the whole entire baking pan, which is typically is really good for us, for our family. See, I'm doing probably, this is a 2-pound bag. I'll usually do maybe 1.5 pounds for our family. We do like it a lot, so it's not a problem of it being finished. And I don't mind leftovers. Something like this is pretty good with leftovers. The good thing about cooking and whatnot, a lot of times, you know, I'll watch TV. We do like watching cooking programs in the house. I like to watch it to get ideas. I stumbled upon this actually watching The Kitchen on the Food Network, and I was like, pretty good. I know a lot of people don't like to eat Brussels sprouts. It's one of those vegetables that you probably have to acquire a taste for. So by themselves, if you boil them or however you might cook them in something else, you might find this as a different way that maybe even people that don't like vegetables that much or don't tend to want to have vegetables, this might be a way to get them to try it. And I know it's been a hit with us since we've done it. So it's been one of those go-to side dishes that we'll use, that I like to cook. Like I said, it's not that hard to make. Basically, you're cutting them in half. As you're cooking it, you just have to watch your temp times. I'll go over that part once I get this going. But it's not that hard. It's just be careful when you're cutting, obviously. You want to watch what you're doing. Bacon, when I put the bacon in it, I typically like a flavored bacon. They have like hickory smoke flavor, applewood. What I'm using right now is the hickory smoke. I do like a lot of hickory flavors, like even if I'm barbecuing, but that flavor adds, a little bit more um, diversity to your Brussels sprouts as well. So, uh, and I'll show you how I add the bacon to the Brussels sprouts. I do also use olive oil and balsamic vinegar to go on these, so it gives a nice little flavor. A lot of times when I'm cooking, I'll ask the family, hey, did you like that? What do you think about that? And their insights actually help, because I may have a certain taste or preference that I like, and they may say, oh, well, it might have been too salty or too sweet, or like with the balsamic vinegar, maybe adding a little bit more of that gives it a little balanced flavor with the olive oil. So, obviously they have an influence on that, and I like to get their perspective on it, which helps me. And then, with cooking, a lot of times you'll figure out something, you have to try things, you don't have to do anything too outrageous, but, tweaking dishes here and there, broadening your spices. As you can see, I do like to use, these are some of my favorite go-to spices. Rosemary was something that I kind of got into about a year ago, and it does add some nice flavor to meat, to vegetables, to fish. It's really good. I like it. Basil, it's a good flavor. Obviously you got salt and pepper, so worst case scenario, if you don't really like a lot of different spices, salt and pepper are something that you can use on a regular basis, and it works fine. So I've got the pan cut with my Brussels sprouts, and with me, these, I love shears. I'll use them to cut my ribs, my chicken, and with bacon, sometimes with a knife, you can kind of, get stuck with the fact of, oh, am I gonna cut myself? Or it has some grease, so it could be slippery. So with me, I will take my bacon, cut it in half, and I'll take the ends and I'll just cut it right across the top of my Brussels sprouts. And depending on how much bacon you like, you can add more, you can add less. I like to kind of get it in all the different grooves of where my Brussels sprouts lie. So I'm just going to keep cutting those. You can do this without bacon. I know some people don't like bacon or don't want bacon. And now I'm not going to say try turkey bacon, because I've never done that. Turkey bacon is good, but with this particular dish, that could be an alternative. Like I said, with cooking, you can try something. You don't have to make as much. You could do maybe half a bag of the Brussels sprouts, try it out with the bacon just to see, and then okay, yeah, that works good, or no, I'll stick with good old bacon. So for me, I'm just cutting these across the top. Once I get it on here, I'll kind of spread it out to where it's evenly distributed between my baking sheet. Let's see, this will be my third strip of bacon. Usually around 3 or 4, and this is a baking sheet, your average baking sheet, so you can see, like I said, I've got a 2-pound bag of Brussels sprouts, probably 3 strips of bacon that I'm cutting. If I see as I spread it through, once I cut it, that I need more, then I'll cut more to add to it. Okay, so I've got some bacon on there, and like I said, once I cut it in half, it'll look like this. And as it cooks, it's going to actually shrink a little bit, so you're not going to have a large amount of bacon, so you're not like putting a full bacon piece on it. But like I said, I'm filling the gaps, keeping it there, so you've got some consistency through the cooking. Actually, when you are going to eat it, then you'll have at least a nice balance to where you got pretty much equal parts bacon distributed between the Brussels sprouts. All right, that's coming along pretty good. Filling in the gaps, like I said, and I don't overfill it. As you can see with my pan, it's just all around the edges, all around the center. I just kind of push it back so it's covered. I am going to do one more piece of bacon because I'm missing a little bit of the gaps to cover. So that's just going to fill in nicely where the gaps are. And it's pretty easy. It's not that hard. A lot of these dinners that I make are pretty much, the preparation part is probably the longest that you physically have to do anything. Once you get everything either on the stove or in the oven, it's just watching it. And I'll give you the timeline that I use to making the Brussels sprouts with bacon. Okay, now that I've got that on there, I'm gonna wash my hands. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna actually add the oil and balsamic vinegar. And like I said, it just depends on what you like. I do not add salt to this because, in my opinion, there'll be enough salt with the bacon as it cooks. I don't want to add too much more salt because I'm not trying to get it to be salty. You want to have a nice balance. But yes, this is balsamic vinegar, and I'm just going to, I start with the balsamic vinegar first, because usually if you put the oil and water, oil and vinegar don't mix that well. So I'll lay down my balsamic vinegar, a few shakes, just so that it's covered. So I've got that on there. Now I'm gonna add my extra virgin olive oil, and I just drizzle it across, evenly across, and I don't stir this. I allow it just to kind of set, but I do use pepper. I'll put some pepper, and I'm not gonna give you like a teaspoon or tablespoon size. I just drizzle from the top, just so I can see it hit the top, because I don't want it to be too powerful, because if you start using too much pepper, it gets a little hot. I do like the restaurant grind. I like it not super coarse, not too fine, just kind of in the middle, and the restaurant grind is kind of in there. If you don't like that, you can use regular pepper, and it just makes the same. So I've got it all on my baking sheet. I've got my oven preheated to 450 degrees, and that'll be cooking at 30 minutes. 400 degrees for 30 minutes, okay? We're gonna put this in the oven, and we'll be right back. All right, so we're back now. So like I said, I've got the mashed potatoes, or the actual potatoes boiling for the mashed potatoes. We've got the Brussels sprouts with the bacon in the oven, 400 degrees for 30 minutes. And I do also make sure I set my timers. I love timers. They'll ask my family, the timer's on, hey, I've got something in there. They already know by now. They know Dad's got his timers going. It's just because sometimes you can get distracted to where you're focused on something. And my whole thing is I'd rather be under than overcook. So I can always add more time. So if I'm short a little bit, I can take a look at it. That way it's not overcooked, because once it's overcooked, you can't save it. But if you're a little bit under, you can kind of test the texture, temperatures, things like that, and that'll help you not burn anything. So timers are your best friend for me. Right now we're going to move over to the meatballs. So for me, I've got 2.5 pounds of ground meat. I like to use 90-10. Obviously it's leaner, but if you prefer, you can do 80. I don't even know if they do 75 anymore, but I like 90%. It's a lot more lean. Lean ground meat is what we kind of shoot for. So that's in my mixing bowl. I do add an egg to bind. So with that, that's just so that it kind of, when you're actually working with the meatballs, that it sticks together, and you have a lot better chance so they're not falling apart as it's cooking, or as they're done and you're picking them up. It's not like going and reaching for a meatball and it collapsing. So I've got that here. I use 1 egg. I'm gonna set this on the side right now. But for my ingredients, like I said, with my meatballs, I do like these. These are my go-to spices, which I've got sea salt, black pepper, thyme, rosemary leaves, garlic salt, I may or may not put that in there. It just depends on everything else that I have. If I use salt, I don't use garlic salt. I'll stay away from that. If I've got basil and I got some chopped chives, I do have a spice that has a spaghetti spice. It's like an Italian spaghetti, and it kind of has a blend. It has almost all these different things all in one, but for the purposes of making the meatloaf, I figure I'd show you on the different measurements we have. So I've got a teaspoon of thyme leaves, put that in there. Teaspoon of basil, goes right in. Got a teaspoon of chopped onions or chives. I've got a half a teaspoon of rosemary leaves. Rosemary leaves, you have to have, it's a different flavor, so not everyone likes that, so I don't use a lot of that. And I do have a tablespoon of pepper. So I like to actually kind of get that going a little bit and mix it around before I add the egg to my ground meat mixture, just stirring it up, making sure that I've got some consistency with the spices that I added, because you don't want to have too much of one of the spice. You want to get it all throughout the whole meat. Like I said, this is 2.5 pounds of ground meat. Typically that's just the right amount of meatballs that I'll make. I do use an ice cream scooper to help kind of gauge the size of meatballs I want to roll out. They do have the ice cream scoopers that have the little release on it. You can use that and you'll get consistent meatballs each time, but I don't mind scooping and kind of rolling, and I'll show you how I do that. So now that I've got my seasonings mixed into the ground meat, I am going to add my egg, and like I said, that's just more to help keep it together. Drop that in there. And for me, I do have my wedding ring. I do have my, believe it or not, high school ring. I take those off because I'm going to get my hands in here. So if you can, like I said, I washed my hands. I've got my hands clear because you don't want to add anything to your mixture or get it into any of your rings. So we're just going to mix it up. And you just squeeze it like I'll squeeze it through my hand. Like I said, that just helps keep binding. That one egg is enough. You don't need more than that in my opinion. Obviously, if you were to do 5 pounds, then you'd add another egg. But for 2.5 pounds, I use the 1 egg, and it works out just fine for what I want to do. I'll look at it. It's consistent, and I can see the spices. Nothing is too heavy. I'm seeing that all my spices are getting worked into my ground meat to make my meatballs. So, get that all going there. And this right here, like I said, nothing too complex. It's a nice meal. You got your meat, you got a starch, you got a veggie. So, it works for me. Got my ice cream scooper, and I'll kind of like put it in my hand, get it together, and I'll roll it around. You're just making nice little circles. Rolling it around. And I do, like I said, use parchment paper. I like parchment paper. It helps prevent sticking. It helps with cleanup. So it makes it a lot more easier. You can just pull that sheet off, and then it's less cleaning that you're going to have to do at the end. Like I said, see the meatball, nice and round. It's not going to be perfectly circular, but it's a meatball. I'll put it, I do it like this, where I'll put mine all at the 4 corners first, and then I'll line up everything else after that, down the middle. As far as how far you want to keep them apart, with the meatballs, they're not going to stick to each other, but I do give them space. They're not going to expand or anything like that, but I do give them space to kind of cook. You know, there will be some juices, even though this is a lean, 90% lean ground meat, it's still going to have some fat that comes out of it. But Like I said, as far as that, we love 90%. You still get the flavor because you've seasoned it. As long as you season well, you can still get that flavor, which turns out good for us. So I'm gonna keep working these meatballs, get them laid out, and we'll be right back. Okay, so I've eyeballed the potatoes that are on the oven, boiling still right now. And finishing the final touches on the meatball. You can make them bigger, you can make them smaller. This is about the average size that we use. As I start placing them on the baking sheet, I can get a better idea of my spacing, but generally it'll be 4 right down the middle, which is good. And then the long way, it varies on how you space it, but I usually try to have it balanced equally throughout my baking sheet. Yeah, and then as far as cooking, like with our mom, she always had us, as we were younger, in the kitchen with her, learning, which is a great thing. You can pick up a lot of different things, and you know, I'm glad I paid attention to the things that my mom was showing us. And our dad does cook too, so that's the one thing that I liked as well, as my dad was always in the kitchen helping out mom. Brothers and sisters, we were always helping out with mom, and she always had something that we could do no matter what our age. She always gave something for us that we could handle and that we could do and be responsible for, so I appreciate that with my mom and my dad. Good thing about that too is it's like, oh, well, you know, it was never one of those things where like our brothers and sisters, we all learned together. We cooked along with my sister. My sister did yard work with us, so that was cool. That was one thing our parents always got instilled with us. You're gonna have to be able to go on your own, take care of yourself, and be able to provide for yourself. And then at some point, if you have a family, you'll be able to provide for your family. So all those things that you instilled in us at a young age, it didn't go away. And the good thing is we can cook, we can fend for ourselves, and you know, we go out and eat, but it's always good to be able to know how to cook at home and be able to pass that on. You hope your kids do the same thing, be able to take care of themselves, and they'll ask you, hey, how did you make that? How did you make this? We used to do the same thing with our parents. So thanks, Mom and Dad. So I've got the meatballs all together. As you can see, they're laid out here on my baking sheet. With the meatballs, I put them at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. So as you can see, sometimes I'll add them with whatever I have in the oven, depending on what I've got in there. If it's not too much going on in there, because you don't want to have your oven too full, because then your heat doesn't get distributed out, and then your cook times are going to be off because the heat is not true to each thing that you're cooking. So with this, because I am using and cooking Brussels sprouts, which isn't anything too heavy, everything is not too full, so I am going to add this into the oven. I'm going to set myself a second timer. However, I am going to move my Brussels sprouts from the bottom of my oven to the top part of the oven, and then I'm going to put wish you could hear it. Sounds good, smells good. I am going to put the meatballs on the bottom, and like I said, for 30 minutes at 350 degrees. So I am going to turn my oven down a little bit. And that'll go. I'll check again on my potatoes. Like I said, I just get a knife, something like that, just a steak knife. And if I can stick it in there and it doesn't pull back, I'll know how close I am. So I stick it in the biggest part, in my largest potato that's in there, and I get an idea. So probably just by testing that, I probably have about 10 more minutes on my potatoes, and I can get started on mashing those. I am setting my timer for my meatballs. The thing I like about the meatballs is you can actually use these meatballs when you have spaghetti. I know some people like traditionally, I'll make my spaghetti, and one of these times I'll put that on there how I do my spaghetti, but you can use meatballs. Some people like meatballs, some people like their meat incorporated with their spaghetti, some people like meatballs and have them on top. This recipe that I'm doing right now for the meatballs I made, you can easily do these in the oven and then add them in a pot and pour your sauce in there, and you'll have meatballs to eat as well. So we're gonna let that cook for a minute and then we'll come right back, okay? Okay, so we're back there, everything's cooking. Right now the potatoes are ready to be drained, so I'm gonna shut that off. Once again, I have that on high. Temperature wise is always high. As far as a time frame, if I had to give you an idea with the potatoes, it's probably on for 20 minutes boiling. So I'm gonna drain these off to my strainer. And I am going to use this pot to put them back in. So what I'll do is I'll put the pot down while the remainder of that water is coming off the potatoes. I've got my butter. We use country crock, depending on, you can use butter, but I am just going to put it on the bottom. I always put some butter on the bottom of my pan first. Quarter cup maybe, if I had to gauge. But it just depends on how much butter you like and the flavor you like and the consistency. I could add a little bit more, but I'm going to take my potatoes and pour them right back directly into my pot. All right, and then here's one of the magic ingredients. I'd never had done this before. When I was younger, I used just good old-fashioned milk. Milk makes it a little bit thick, but mayonnaise in your potatoes. Some people may say, oh, I've never heard of that, or that's odd. That too is also what you prefer. So as far as gauging it out, I'm looking at that now, it's probably a cup worth into the bowl. I have my masher. So what I'm going to do is start mashing, and then as I get the consistency I want, you can tell as you're mixing, it's nice and hot. That butter is getting incorporated with that. So if you like them thicker, obviously you can use less butter or less mayonnaise. If you like it to be more creamy, then you can use more mayonnaise. So that was awesome. My beautiful wife was the one that introduced me to using mayonnaise, and I'm like, what? I never heard of that. Are you kidding me? So, yep. But that is one of the nice little hidden thing. So as you can see, the consistency, these are nice and fluffy. So as you can keep going and mixing them together with your potato masher, you'll get the consistency you want. Now I mash first before I add my seasoning to it, and I may add a little bit more mayo, it just depends. But on this one here, I'll use a little bit of thyme leaves, a little bit of basil, some chopped onions, you can't go bad. Here's how I look at it. If you've ever had a baked potato, what do you like on your baked potato? I like some chives on top of mine. Garlic salt, I do use garlic salt. I'll use a little bit, and for measuring purposes, I just lightly, and I've always known to go higher so I can kind of see it come down, and I'll just sprinkle a little bit, and I'll mix. So as I mix, so it doesn't get too salty, because it is garlic salt, it's going to add some salt, so I don't want to add too much of it to it. I can mix it first. That's why I use the basil. I use a little bit of basil, just a sprinkle, and all I am is sprinkling. If you look at how you like say you have something and you're just adding salt and pepper or something, just very lightly on there. If you love basil, you can add more, just to give you an idea of what that kind of looks like. Thyme, I'll add a little bit of thyme. So if I had to say, I'd say probably a pinch of basil, a couple of pinches of thyme, a pinch of garlic salt. But like I said, once again, it depends on the flavor, which I'll check. And that's one thing about cooking and everything like that. You do need to taste as you're seasoning items like this, just to kind of get an idea. Like you can always add, that goes like to temperatures. You can always cook your temperatures at a certain degree with less time and then check and say, okay, I need to add a few more minutes. Same thing with seasoning. I don't like to over season with salt because salt is so sharp that you can't get it back. You can't add anything else, in my opinion, to deflect salt. So I am gonna taste the mashed potatoes. Consistency is there, flavor is there. I am gonna add just one more scoop of mayo, just because of the flavor and the consistency that I want. And that is plenty there. So I'm just gonna mix this up. Like I said, on the butter, depending on what you like as far as how much butter you like your potatoes to taste like. And we did use russet potatoes, so there's all different kinds of potatoes. There's red potatoes, there's Idaho potatoes, russet potatoes, golden potatoes. You can do it with all those, just depends on what you like. So let me try that and see what we're looking at. See if that's the flavor I want. Perfect. Smooth, no lumps in the mashed potatoes. That's gonna come out really nice. So as the Brussels sprouts and meatballs are coming to a close, they're pretty much almost finished. I'm gonna look in the oven and kind of give a quick look. But yeah, with the Brussels sprouts, I know it wasn't one of the vegetables that I'd always use, but as we tried something new, it's been something that it's a hit. And usually when it's a hit, you know, you just keep with it, and family likes it. You obviously want to make something that they're going to continue to eat and enjoy, and that's something that we do enjoy eating and having. So I'm just kind of working this together as I'm waiting for the Brussels sprouts.